Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the Daniel Tolson live stream. Today we're joined by my good friend Friska Wira, and she's going to be talking to us about how you tell a good story. Now, as you're communicating with your audience, you have to be able to capture people's attention. And we're bringing in one of Australia's top experts today to share with us the elements of telling us a great story. So, Friska, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Daniel.
Now, you know all about the Asian culture, you know the pros and the cons, and saving face is a very important element in the culture here in Southeast Asia. How does this impact business people's ability to tell a good story?
Well, I think, first of all, there's a disproportionate emphasis placed on IQ. When you think about it, IQ is just the bare minimum you need to get your foot in the door, get a job, maybe start a business. And then EQ was popularized by Daniel Goleman. Now, what the Asian culture doesn't realize is that AQ is even more important. So what is AQ? AQ is adaptability and adversity quotient. And that's all about learning obsolete knowledge, overcoming challenges, making a conscious effort to change. If you don't change, you don't progress. And that's what a lot of Asian cultures struggle with.
Well, you mentioned before when we're offline that you'd come to Taiwan, firstly for the food. And the new thing I learned today was supposedly we are the New Zealand of Asia, which is nice.
Yeah.
And one of the challenges we have here in the culture here is we have what's called a strawberry generation. And if anybody knows much about strawberries, you touch them and they bruise.
They bruise,
They
yes.
bruise straight away. So we have to have this AQ, and I really like that. I'm not so familiar with the concept. I'm aware of the work of Daniel Goleman, but if you could explain that AQ a little bit deeper in the context of how do we use this AQ to prepare us to tell a good story?
Yeah, sure. So change is constant, right? And it can be disruptive and challenging. So your ability to actually view change as an opportunity and managing it effectively is even more critical. But that's you. You then need to influence others to change. And how do you influence others? By telling a good story, because information simply informs, but emotions will influence and they will inspire people to take action. So a good example of this is Steve Jobs when he first marketed the iPod. What did he say? 1,000 songs in your pocket. People got it. That is storytelling. Everybody else was saying, oh, a 1 gigabyte MP3 player. Needless to say, Apple dominated the market. So stories are everything. We are hardwired for stories and connection. And that's why we always remember a favorite nursery rhyme, a favorite fable. These stick with us.
I can't recall my grandfather sitting me down on his knee and reading out facts to me. But I can remember about him telling stories when he crossed the Nullarbor in Australia. He told me that he crossed the Nullarbor in a ute. And at that stage, he was in the Air Force. And they were crossing the Nullarbor with my grandmother, my mum, and my mum's younger brother. And they had to camp across the flats. And so it's just in this desert, arid environment. And he said they were laying down there one night in the middle of there's just nothing around, no trees, no nothing, just across the Nullarbor. And he said, Daniel, I was sitting beside the campfire and I heard this dog howl. Oh! And as soon as he did that, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I had all the goosebumps on my arm. And he said, and then after the dog howled, I heard the chain rattle. And then I heard the snake hiss. And all of a sudden you lean forward and you're scared, but you want to hear the story. And so, it makes sense when you say we're hardwired. As soon as you hear those words, once upon a time, everybody leans forward and ready to hear a story.
When you think about it, sticks and stones can break your bones, but words can move a nation. When you think about the Gettysburg Address, that was 3 minutes. That inspired a whole civil rights movement. Obama's speech, that was 6 minutes. And it's all because they are master storytellers. We could imagine what the future looked like. And that's what I do for a living. I have to help organizations and the individuals within them through storytelling for them to want to change, to become better.
So how do you tell a good story?
You have to get back to basics. Who are the characters? What's the plot? There's always a hero and a villain, and you always need a hook.
So for people who are starting their business, they've got all the education, they've got all the knowledge, and now they've got to make that emotional connection. What are some of the elements that are involved in telling a really good story? What do they need to take into consideration as they prepare for their story?
When you're starting a business, definitely you need to clearly identify your why, your values, and your drivers. And from then, because people, they don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. They want to know the person behind the brand. And so you need to be able to pull people in through your own personal story. If you don't think you have one, think again. Everybody has a story.
Even your website has a story.
Ah, yes, it does.
And I love this photo. So cool. So cool. So people are out there and they're preparing to tell a story. They've got to have a why, and they've got to start to have their elements. So they start to craft out their story. And then as we think about the benefits, what are the benefits of a good story? What can a good story do for your reputation? What can a good story do for your business's reputation?
Well, when you think about the cost of ineffective communication, I was reading a study the other day in a survey of 400 companies in the US and UK alone. The cost was $30 billion, billions with a B. Imagine if you could effectively story tell your vision for change and draw people in rather than pulling people. Like that would save you a lot of effort and time. So it's a very
Mm.
important skill to master.
With storytelling and the development of your career and your business, and you're the expert in the field, how has it impacted your ability to tell a compelling story with a strong hook? How's that transformed your business?
So I'm only recently, not even a year. So it's been 10 months since I started my own solopreneurship. I'm a change management consultant. And how could I stand out amongst a sea of other consultants? It's through my story. So bringing my experiences to life through story. And I have a very, shall we say, not well understood discipline, because I'm not an accountant. I'm not a finance guy. I'm not an HR person. When people say, what's change? Isn't that fluffy comms and training? So I have to use storytelling and narrative to communicate my value add very clearly and very succinctly. And within less than 6 weeks of launching my own business, I started consulting to what is the Harvard of Australia, the University of Melbourne, accelerating their digital transformation. And it was all through my storytelling.
Incredible. Incredible. How does it make you feel to know that you can impact people's lives by teaching them this skill?
Surreal. I didn't realize it was such an in-demand skill until I started in the first round of lockdowns in Melbourne. I was living in Melbourne at the time. I thought, right, what do I do? So I started offering the workshops that I used to do internally for clients to the public, and they were very well attended. So it's only now that I've realized that it's quite in demand.
Mm. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us. Arthur's here, so thanks for joining us, Arthur. And Arthur's I think he's really enjoying it because he's the one who's posting the most today. And what he said here is that you can view change as an opportunity and you can manage it accordingly. I know in my field, we can tell stories that will help people change at an unconscious level. And, future pacing people where you want them to be, pacing their current experience is so
Mm,
important, but it's a skill that can be developed. I think a lot of people, Friska, think there's people who are born storytellers, but in my
mm,
opinion, it's a learnable skill. It's like becoming a pilot. There's no such thing as a born pilot. There's no such thing
correct.
as a born
Yeah.
doctor. These are all skills that you can acquire over time. So for you, you're consulting there at Australia's equivalent to Harvard. Along your journey, what are some of the skills that you've picked up along the way? What have you had to develop within yourself to be able to achieve these amazing results?
Well, I invested in my communication and presentation skills. So that's one. And for the people watching out there, I wanted to emphasize the point that you just make. It is a skill that can be learned just like any other, but you're not going to get there tomorrow. And it takes effort, practice, and dedication, right? It's just like when you were learning to ride your bike. You like, mentally, you knew how to do it. You get on your bike, you turn your feet, you put your feet in the pedals, and you start turning. The exact same thing comes with storytelling. Know what good looks like, and then practice using real life examples in your day-to-day life. So the other skills that I had to cultivate was social skills. That's a big one. So I'm an only child, and I lost both my parents at 2 weeks old, and I had quite a nomadic, isolated childhood, being ping-ponged from auntie to uncle to uncle, one set of grandparents to another. So I was very awkward as a child. So no one ever accomplished anything by themselves. So I had to learn, get back to basics, develop rapport with people from all walks of life, all sorts of professions, all different countries, all different backgrounds. So that was probably my most valuable skill that I had to cultivate with intention. And also, I'm introverted by nature, and all the information out there in the mainstream media is shout your story from the rooftops, always speak up in meetings, da 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 da. That didn't work for me. So I had to find what worked for me. So I knew what my strengths were, and I knew what my sweet spot was, and I interact better in small groups or one-on-ones. So instead of going out for Friday drinks with everybody else, I would have coffee catch-ups with key influencers in the business. So I was very strategic about it.
Mm. Can we rewind the tape for 60 seconds? You lost both your parents at age 2 weeks.
Yes.
How do you move on from that?
You don't really miss what you never had. I often looked on to and I was sick of, being an outsider, looking in on someone else's happy family unit. So my friends are the family that I wish I was born with.
I hear a lot of people coming up with a lot of excuses not to succeed. And some of them are valid and some of them aren't. But I've never heard this before. You lost your parents 2 weeks after. As a child, how did you develop these skills about storytelling? Because normally we'd rely on our parents to tell us stories. Who was telling you stories at a younger age?
So I was always a bookworm. I dove into books, and that's how I learned, because I didn't have siblings. I didn't have family of my own, and I moved to Australia in the single digits in the 80s, and it was a very, very challenging time back then. It was extremely racist. I've had broken bottles and rotten fruit thrown at me. I've been spat on. I've been told to go back where I come from. And it's from all sources, your well-dressed businessmen, your derelicts hanging around the train station, the rich kids at school. So I had to be very comfortable with my own company, and I found solace in books. Amazing. So I lose myself in stories. Yeah.
And is it therapeutic for you? Does it help soothe those wounds, writing and reading and telling stories?
Yeah, because you lose yourself in stories, definitely.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you're joining us here, we're talking about telling good stories. But Friska has just shared with us that at age 2 weeks, she lost both of her parents. And, I talk a lot about resiliency. I talk a lot about emotional intelligence. I talk a lot about self-regulation. But here we have somebody who's had a major event in their life, but they have gone on to influence billion-dollar businesses and thousands of people around the world. And I think the most important thing that I'm learning here, Friska, yes, stories are important, but it's your resiliency and your ability to go on. So
Correct.
What's the rest of your life story look like? You come to Australia, people spitting at you, throwing things at you, harassment. What's the rest of your story through your teen years?
So I was, like I said, I was sick of kind of looking in on my cousins. They were all very close with their families, and I wanted something different. And it always bullied at school because I stood out. I had a funny name. So yeah, funny name, the way I looked, and my natural
funny names. my daughter tells me my name's boring. She says, "Dad, you got a boring name." Okay, my apologies.
You had a different name. It's remembered, but back then I was like, damn it. Why can't I be called Anne or something? You know, something basic.
Or something from the Bible, Matthew,
Yeah,
Mark,
yeah.
Luke, or John.
No offense if there's anybody called Anne that's listening right now. Yeah, so I wanted to go do my own thing. And I asked to go to Sydney. So I was 14 at the time. And my extended family said no, obviously, because I was too young. But man, I'm stubborn and I was very determined. And I was very unhappy in Perth. And so they relented after day 3 of a hunger strike with a few conditions, of course. They said you can live with a friend of the family first, which I did. And then I eventually shared a house with 3 other girls in Kingsford. But it's then that I make many, life mistakes, typical of a young, impressionable girl in the big smoke. I hang out with the wrong people. Because I was unhappy, I started numbing my pain in toxic ways. I do enough partying for like multiple lifetimes. Anyway, obviously I start to spiral downwards, and it took a few years for me to regain my way. And since then, I've cut everything toxic out of my life, toxic substances, toxic people, and toxic thoughts. And so my first boss at the time inspired me to go back to university. And lo and behold, my brain was still very, very strong. And so I never looked back. I applied myself. I win a scholarship to go to California, and then just bang, 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 post-grad, do an MBA, cut my teeth in management consulting, come back to Australia, capitalize on the mining industry. And it's only then that change management starts to be recognized as a discipline. And it intrigues me, right? It plays to my strengths. Like I have literally changed and transformed my life multiple times. And now I can do this for global businesses. Like, wow. And so I took a 40% pay cut to step down from management consulting, start from a change analyst, and just work my way up with unwavering dedication, laser-like focus, and unshakable discipline. And fast forward less than 7 years later, I'm head of change for one of the biggest gold mining companies in the world.
And ladies and gentlemen, that's how you tell a good story. What do they call that? Do they call it the hero's journey?
That's why, if you want anything in life, anything worth having, it doesn't come overnight, but just because you can't see the whole staircase doesn't mean you don't take the first step. So take the first step. You'll figure it out.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's an amazing thing to be able to have a school to tell a story, but to see how it comes out so naturally. And you could even see the turning point there, the turning point where you got rid of all the toxic substances. And so I know you're a good storyteller because you're doing it here and you're telling us such a beautiful story and people are loving it. Derek loves it. Daniel loves it. Saba UK, our friend Carl in the UK, he loves it. Arthur loves it. Morna loves it. Derek loves it. Phenomenal. I mean, what an amazing skill. Now, before I let you go, I've got 5 questions. I got 5 questions that I want to tick off here. And thank you so much for sharing, by the way. And I think what I've learned over the years is having vulnerability in business. And you have to be able to share your story, whatever your story is. You have to be able to tell it because, Frisco, I was talking to a business couple in South Australia. And they said, Daniel, we want to do a partnership with one of your programs. I told them all about the partnership, what we're going to do, what we could achieve, and what was involved. And they said, what's your why? And I said, how do you mean? They said, well, why do you do what you do? And if I was talking about disc styles and the high D personality, I just said, well, because I'm fucking good at it. That's why I do it. And the lady looked at me, she said, that's not a good enough why. And I said, I beg your pardon. She said, well, just because you're fucking good at it is not a good enough why. She said, what is truly your why? And I said, well, I'm not one to complain. And I said, but here's my story. And I told her the story and her jaw almost fell off her face. She said, can we do business together? And it was the difference of somebody understanding the logic and understanding the emotional content and the reasons why, because it had that emotional hook and she could truly feel where I was coming from. It was a major part. So I'm gonna hit you with 5 rapid fire questions. What frustrates you the most? What's most frustrating in your life?
When people are not willing to do something different, even though they're not getting the results from what they're doing now. So I see this time and time again in organizations wanting to embark on game-changing large-scale transformations, but then they turn around and they don't set it up for success. They take shortcuts. They don't understand the ramifications of their short-term thinking. It leads to long-term fixing at the end of the day. So that's probably my number one bugbear. Yeah.
And your most embarrassing moment. What's your most embarrassing moment?
Oh my God. So I was on my way from Mumbai to Hyderabad for work, and I knew I had to give a presentation when I got there on a new operating model I was engaged to implement. It was only a day trip, so I had no luggage, just my laptop and whatever I was wearing. I'm an experienced traveler, right? But this was the plane ride from hell. 1 hour and 25 minutes of crying babies. It freaking stank. There was someone eating a few seats away from me that could only be described as the most pungent cheese in the world. And the lady beside me
It
was
might have
just
been the breast
constantly
milk.
in her sick bag. Anyway, just hearing her retch made me queasy. But anyway, we're about to make our descent. I was like, oh, thank God, I want to get off this freaking plane, And she excuses herself, goes to the toilet, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, she comes back, looks a bit more green. I'm in the aisle seat. And just as she sits down, she projectile vomits all down my freaking left arm and shoulder. It's like, oh my God, I'm like glammed up, about to, knock out a prezzo out of the park to the leadership team. And now I look absolutely ridiculous. I had no change of clothes. I had no hotel. I couldn't shower. Thank God for baby wipes. Yeah, I had to present like that.
And that's how you tell another wonderful story. Now, what one mental or emotional block has held you back the most in your life?
Yeah, I would say that blood isn't always thicker than water, that family isn't only who you are related to. And so I cherish and value my friends, my colleagues, my peers. And someone told me about this saying, and I really believe it: everybody that crosses your path, they're there for a season, a reason, or a lifetime, right? The trick is to discern which bucket they fall into. And you need to be okay with and accept that very far and few between will ever make it into the lifetime bucket. And that's how it should be. I'm a big believer in quality over quantity.
And for other people who are currently struggling with that same mental block, choosing friends for a reason, choosing friends for a season, what advice would you share with somebody who is struggling with the same problem?
I follow Dr. Brené Brown, and she has an acronym for trust, and it's called braving. So I'll quickly explain it to you. It's worth its weight in gold because it's a solid framework to pinpoint why you don't trust someone, and it gives you the talking points to then discuss it authentically from a place of strength, not from a place of finger pointing and blame. So B is for boundaries. You respect mine and you're clear with yours. R is for reliability. You do what you say all the time, not just one-off. Accountability, no buck passing or excuses, right? If you make a mistake, you own it, you apologize, and you actually make amends. V is for vault, which is about confidentiality. You don't use gossip to supercharge connections and relationships, right? You maintain my confidentiality and others as well. I is for integrity, so choosing courage over comfort, doing what's right over what's easy or popular. And this is about practicing your values, not just professing them, because talk is cheap. N is for non-judgment, and this is a big one because you cannot judge people for asking for help if you are also judging yourself. So this is about not branding other people as weak. And lastly, G is for generosity. So being generous with your thoughts, words, and actions of others, assuming positive intent. So that's the acronym braving. Google it. So watch out for energy vampires and rely on that framework.
Amazing. Well, ladies and gentlemen, today you've learned how to tell a good story. You've not just learned it in theory, you've seen it in action. You've also learned the elements involved in a good story. You now know the benefits of a good story, and you can see how telling a good story can impact both your personal and your corporate brand. So, Friska, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it, and we'll have to do it again soon. So, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, we look forward to seeing you tomorrow at 3 p.m. Ciao for now.
See ya.